Okay, today we're going to be going over a game between two of the great old warriors from the past, from the 1800s. Adolf Anderssen, who was also an opponent of Morphy. Anderssen also was the winner of the famous game that they call the Evergreen game. And his opponent was a famous German master named Max Lange, a great tactician. He had an opening named after him called the Max Lange attack. And he had the appropriate nickname of Max the Axe. So the opening that was played today, Anderssen was white. It's known as the Rye Lopez, the most common opening in the history of chess. And Max Lange played a variation that's called the bird's defense. Now notice how white has made a second move with the bishop now. First he moved it to b5, then c4. And it's somewhat offset by the fact that black also moved his knight twice. So he puts the bishop on a more aggressive attacking square. Now, this is a common response oftentimes to e5 when white has a bishop on c4, is to counter with d5. And now the white bishop has now moved 3 times in the first 7 moves. And Max Lange gets this idea that maybe because this bishop has moved 3 times, white deserves to be punished for this. And he plays the whole game with the idea that white has played incorrectly and deserves to be punished. And that's the whole premise of the game. Is the amount of time white wasted by moving his bishop 3 times in the first 7 moves worthy of punishment or not? And it turns out that Max Lange won the game, but it's possible that maybe it didn't deserve punishment, as we'll demonstrate later on. Now note here, pawn takes bishop cannot be played immediately because of queen h4 check. Pawn goes to g3 and knight takes g3 with a big attack for black. So white has to delay the idea of taking either the knight or the bishop till possible future consideration. Now this move, of course, has 2 ideas. One, by putting the pawn on d3, it makes it impossible for white to move his d2 pawn right away, and therefore the bishop on c1 is going to remain dormant for a while. And number 2, it opens up the idea for this bishop to come to c5 with check, as we will see happens later on. Now this is a critical mistake, as the rest of the game will point out. Okay, much better would be to play queen to e1. Okay, and therefore, after bishop c5 check, king h1, if the knight tries to go to f2, then black is going to lose both his bishop and his knight for the rook on f1. Okay, so pawn takes bishop as played in the game, loses the game. Queen e1 gives white the advantage. But back then they had, in the 1800s, they kind of had a swashbuckling spirit about them. And the prevailing opinion was that, you know, just like when somebody challenged you to a duel, you generally were honor bound to accept it. Well, in chess games, when somebody offered you a gambit, it was generally thought that you should always, accept the challenge and take the gambit. So here, white goes ahead and takes the bishop. Black plays the anticipated bishop c5 check. King moves. And now white probably thought that black was simply going to go knight to f2 check and win the exchange. But black had bigger things on the mind, specifically checkmating the white king, as you'll see. Of course, only move, and now the pawns are tripled. Now the threat is queen to h6 mate. There's only one possible move that white has, and that's to go rook f5, and now queen h6 can be answered by rook h5. But black had this brilliant move in mind, sacrificing the queen for checkmate after the pawn goes to h5. Now, of course, if rook takes queen, pawn takes pawn, rook blocks on h5, rook takes rook mate. So there's only one possible response here, even though it's not a good one. Pawn takes pawn, which of course allows queen takes rook. Now, of course, rook takes h5 is in the air. So white plays the only move. And now black finishes them off in brilliant style with this brutal attack. Now he's threatening to go queen h4 mate. The fatal checkmate dance is about to begin. After this move, queen f3, we have what my friend likes to call, they used to have a commercial for laundry detergent called Ring Around the Collar. This is like Ring Around the King with this little checkmate dance. Okay, and now white resigned because if king to h1, then bishop to f2, king has to go back to h2, and then queen g1 mate. A brilliant victory by Max Lange. But, as we remember, all this could have been avoided. This terrible fate could have been avoided simply by playing queen here, and then nobody would have known about this game in chess history very much, because even after bishop goes to c5, king h1, now the pieces are both the pieces that are under attack by the pawn are still under attack, and they can be taken later. And it's not clear that black has enough for the attack. He doesn't, in fact, have enough for this attack. But that doesn't mean that the way black played was any less brilliant. He didn't have the benefit of hindsight and computers and all that, so he made a little bit of miscalculation, but still a brilliant concept nonetheless. And a lot of these games are tremendous learning games, because they teach you about, basic tactical themes, and they also teach you the importance of calculating accurately in your games. Okay, thank you, everybody. This is Mike Joelson, again with Progress with Chess, and I hope you enjoyed the show.